Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about movements and initiatives that seek to move humanity to its next epochal iteration. This podcast is brought to you by Whitlingo. When it comes to managing a community, one of the keys to success is the ability to effectively communicate with the members of that community. If you are a service coordinator or responsible for community engagement, Whitlingo provides a multi-channel, multilingual notification and engagement platform to help you work more efficiently and effectively. For more information, please visit www.whitlingo.com. That's www.whitlingo.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid.
Wonderful. So let me ask you the following. Since October 7th, what has surprised you the most of all the things that have happened relating to Gaza and Palestine? I'll start with you, Sarah. What has surprised you the most?
Certainly what surprised me the most is the mass student uprising in the United States, and the fact that this generation of students has not only dramatically shifted from prior generations in terms of their overall attitude and understanding of Israel as a settler colonial state, of Israel as an apartheid state, but also that this has become the defining issue of their time. You know, this is the protest movement in America right now, and frankly, it even vastly exceeds the protest movement that we saw for Black Lives Matter within the college campuses. And I can't think of a movement on campuses that was as big until probably South African apartheid protests. So that is extremely heartening. I think I was at my daughter's law school graduation yesterday at NYU, and I would say probably 20 to 25, if not 30% of the students were wearing keffiyehs on top of their graduation robes. And there were at least 10, if not 15, major disruptions during the event with students unfurling flags of Palestine, and they were not all Arabs and they were not all Muslims. There were a lot of South Asian kids, there were a lot of East Asian kids, ethnic origin. So it was a very diverse level of support, and it really showed how much the youth of America has shifted on this question, and I don't think there's any going back from it. And so I think that's why it's become so much more naked, that the supporters of Israel are a small cabal of wealthy billionaires, whereas the youth and largely the progressives in the United States have completely shifted on Israel. You know, that progressive accept Palestine, which was the rule even for progressives in America, that has gone away. So that's a silver lining, if there ever was one, from my point of view. But, you know, also it's very heartening, because I had kind of written off this generation, or the youth of today, as being completely self-obsessed and self-focused, you know, with their emotional,
all kinds of
gender, you know, all of that. It's very self-oriented. It's very me-oriented. And this is a completely external focused activation, which again I find very heartwarming and impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor Fadel, go ahead.
Yeah, what shocked, I'll tell you what kind of shocked me, only because sometimes there's a disconnect between our reflective reasoning and then our experience of reality. So I had always been of the view, well, not always, but in the last few years, I come to the conclusion that Zionism is a deeply pathological ideology, in the sense that it's so completely immersed in its own myth-making that it requires complete cognitive dissonance from empirical reality. So it's one thing to understand that at the level of ideology. Lots of ideologies can become like wildly fantastic in that sort of way. But what really shocked me was the extent to which Israelis and Zionists themselves have individually, right, internalized this kind of madness, right? And I think that's really what has in some part led to what Sarah is talking about. Because when you have the kind of sadistic joy and destruction and death and humiliation of other people, and you're doing it on, TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, right? Normal people look at you and say, you are crazy. I don't want to have anything to do with you. And that's sort of the really shocking thing to me, is the extent to which Israelis and Zionists are incapable of seeing how utterly insane they look to the rest of the world, right? Again, it's one thing for me as a critic of ideology to say this ideology is really, really dangerously irrational. But I can say that about lots of political ideologies. In most cases, adherents of those ideologies don't really internalize the full irrationality of it, right? What's been shocking to me is the extent to which otherwise reasonable people who appear to be reasonable and function at a high level professionally, in demanding professions, have thoroughly internalized this irrationality. And so on the one hand, that gives me hope in the way that Sarah has mentioned. On the other hand, it terrifies me, because I feel that Israel feels that the window of opportunity for completing its project has shortened dramatically, right? And so in another generation, it's going to be too late. So they might be accelerating their genocidal impulses because they think it's like use it or lose it sort of situation.
But don't you think that just as they are totally oblivious, it seems to me, of how they're being perceived by the rest of the world, and they just post these videos of them destroying, food, going to, refugees who are starving, attacking taking people's furniture from their houses in the West Bank. They just post them proudly and so on and so forth. They're oblivious to that. Do you think that Israel is oblivious to the fact that, this is just will not stand, right? They think that people will forget and they'll just take over Gaza and all that. Do you think that is at that level? Do you think that that's another example of being, living in a fantasy world, thinking that they can normalize this eventually?
I think that the irrationality comes from the view that they believe that they can actually physically destroy Palestinians and that will solve their problem, right? What they don't understand is that by physically destroying the Palestinians, that's creating for themselves infinitely more problems. Because as Sarah Lee said, if you look at the demographics of the United States, there's a reason why. There's a reason why student protest movement for Palestine is exploding today. It's because the demographics of US universities have radically changed. The kids that are in school today are not overwhelmingly, but a very large number of them are coming from regions of the world that were colonized. They understand what it means to be colonized, right? And they see, it's very easy for them to see Israel as a colonizing power, right? And so they see through, the bullshit, right? Whereas, students who haven't had that experience, they're much more taken in, I think, by, this democracy rhetoric, right? If you are from the global South, you understand that colonial democracy is not democracy at all, but racism. And committing genocide is par for the course for colonialists, not for democracies. So you can't continue in this policy without destroying yourself. But Israel doesn't see that because it has this sort of unchecked support from, a lack of a better term, a colonial elite in the United States.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, Sarah Lee, how do you explain the fact that the youth Oh, let me just say this. The three of us have something in common, by the way, which is we all of us have somebody who graduated on the last 2-3 weeks. So my son graduated 2 weeks ago. I think Muhammad, your daughter graduated last few days ago,
Yes.
and Sarah Lee. So congratulations to all of us. We have done a great job. And we've spent a lot of money. Anyway, so Sarah Lee, how do you explain this phenomenon of the students uprising, not only just an eruption, but seems to be a very thoughtful, thought through, strategically informed movement? It is a movement that is not simply encampments, it is much more than that. How do you explain that happening and that being such a sustainable, it seems to me, movement at this time? Why is it happening now, here and now in the United States?
I've just
How
written
would you,
about this
how would you
actually.
explain?
I think it's a combination of factors. You know, this didn't happen overnight. I think this starts with the fact that increasingly Palestinians have found an international voice and speak an international language that the young people of the United States and around the world really understand. I think for a long time, there was a language barrier, and we didn't have Palestinian voices prominent and integrated within Western cultural institutions, academic institutions, legal institutions. At the same time, we have human rights organizations who have been working over many years to come to the place where they've issued legal conclusions that Israel is committing the crime of apartheid, which, you know, as international organizations really gives the stamp of imprimatur to the claims that Palestinians, of course, have been making for much longer. I think these really helped shift and create an international elite discussion on Palestine that had shifted and has shifted, such that what students have been learning within universities, within law schools, increasingly included an understanding of the Palestine question as a matter of law, as a matter of politics and colonialism. Couple that with social media allowing real-time conveyance of the facts on the ground of what Israel's war in Gaza has looked like, and the ability of young people in particular to share that information widely on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook. You know, these have all converged to create what is an understanding of the situation in Palestine that is rooted in an acknowledgement that it is apartheid, and now increasingly that it is genocide. The substantiation of these claims by having the International Criminal Court currently examining Israeli war crimes and crimes against humanity, the International Court of Justice reviewing 2 cases, both the illegality of Israel's occupation and the genocidal onslaught in Gaza. You know, it's the combination of those factors happening at the same time that I think has created this groundswell of support for Palestinians.
Yeah, absolutely. Mohammed, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I would add again, this is a post 9/11 generation. All my kids grew up in the shadow of the war on terror. It's hard for us to understand the burden that imposed on the kids of this generation. They're opposed to forever war, right? And I think they understand instinctively that the question of Palestine is at the heart of the war on terror. And they understand that the only way to bring an end to forever wars is to bring peace in Palestine. They understand that instinctively. And then when they go to college and they learn about the history of Palestine, they learn about international law, they learn about human rights, they now have analytical tools to make claims about how we can solve this in a way that brings peace, respects the dignity of all, and can actually bring an end to forever wars that are basically destroying their futures. And so, you know, hats off to them and salute. I went to I've now been to several camps. I went to the Columbia camp. I went to the Stanford camp. I went to the Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz camp. I went to the Berkeley camp. And I wanted to cry at every single one of them. Because when I was an undergraduate in the 80s, we would do Palestine events and we would get like maybe 5 or 6 people, right? And I was just completely in jaw-dropping awe of what I saw, and very inspired and so happy that I actually left my job at Sullivan and Cromwell to do what I'm doing. Because I
Yeah.
feel like, I have to do a little bit that I can to support these great kids, right? That are pushing our country and the world in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll add my 2 cents to this as follows. I think these kids, there's also the domestic context. I think the fact that they are, this is post-COVID, and they are in a, I would say, an economic bind, in the sense that the economy is bad for them, their jobs are not there, and they see all these billions and billions of dollars being sent to Ukraine, being sent to all these wars. And I think they are understanding that the system is sort of upside down. There's a whole lot of neglect of the infrastructure, education, and all that. Not because this country is poor, but because it is rich. Because it is rich in the sense that it is sending all these billions of dollars out there in the name of security. And also, just to piggyback on Mohammed's point of, they're living in the shadow of 9/11, the security state now compared to, I don't know, 1999, it's just night and day, right? They know, they surveil, and they all those things, and then combined with the environmental movements, so it just feels like this has been, like I think Sarah Lee said, that has been brewing for a while, right? And it's just coming together. And I think Gaza is just focusing because it had all the elements. It has colonialism, it has race, it has colonialism. All of that is sort of bundled, and I think it's it feels to me that whole is like the perfect storm in a way, that got us to this point. But I am just like you guys. I'm very heartened. I don't travel much, so I'm a DC area guy. So I've been to Georgetown, GW, American University, went to Virginia Tech, UVA, and it's the same kind of a feeling that I have, which is amazing. And right now, I want to stay out of their way and see if I can help in any way possible. As you well know, I think you both know that I'm trying to build this thing about alumni, because we are also former students, right? And we should stand with the current students, or the ones who are graduating as well. Let me ask you a personal question, and I'll answer it myself first before I ask you to answer it. Have you lost any friendships as a result of this? I have. How about you guys? I'll start with you, Mohammed.
Well, it's been a difficult situation, I think,
Oh, frozen. Can we hear you?
in the
Can
university
you say it again?
in general.
Yeah. Just friendships.
I think it's been a difficult situation.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
Oops.
academia is a weird institution. So I would say that I had a lot of professional relationships that have suffered. I'm not sure I would call them necessarily friendships, because just sadly don't have a lot of time for deep and meaningful friendships, because of the nature of the work. But I think that professional relationships with colleagues have deteriorated some, because they resent my public openness about Palestine. One of the curious things is that very few of my colleagues are willing to defend Israel publicly, but they resent public criticisms of it.
Buffering issue.
So they want it to be covered up, which I think is sad.
So are these folks who are resentful of the fact that you are being outspoken, and they agree with you, and they are sort of objecting you to your outspokenness, or are these people who are on the other side and they don't like your opinion?
I think they're on the other side, but they don't want to say so openly.
Okay. And Sarah Lee, have you What has this, well, what has this done to your personal life, if anything?
You know, I have been so active on issues of Israel-Palestine for over 20 years that there's no way someone would be a close friend of mine while holding, views that I find morally offensive, morally repugnant. So anyone that was not going to be my friend because they support Israeli apartheid, long ago left my orbit of friendship. And I am, uh, I mean, it is very much a red line for me. I will not tolerate, support for the ongoing actions in Israel, and if you didn't know before, you know now. So for me, there's absolutely no excuse or justification, and I have no toleration for it.
Yeah, yeah. The reason I'm asking is because I was, let's call me before October 7th, or in fact even before Ukraine, one of those people who was just a happy-go-lucky liberal, right? I would watch the Rachel Maddow show and I would enjoy it, and everything against Trump is bad, bad, bad. And so I had my red line at the time being, you're a Trumpster, okay, then you are a bad person. And I've come to revise that, right? But I don't think I'm going to come to revise this. I don't think so. I think this is just way, way too much to say, well, I forgive you. I was wrong, or I was too harsh or too radical. I don't think one can be too radical about, you know, just raw genocide that's happening. Um, anyway, so um, the media, right? The media, obviously, the mainstream media continues, or in fact has deteriorated, it seems to me, in terms of them being, I don't know, CNN and MSNBC, although once in a while they do some reporting here and there. But as far as the framework and the paradigm and all that it remains just this filter that will yield the same story. Israel is being attacked, and notwithstanding all the craziness here and there, but the story remains the same. What is heartening, I think, and tell me if you agree, is the birth, again, because of social media, of these islands. And there are more than islands now, because they're becoming where young people go, and people who are even not young people who want to not be who don't want their intelligence to be insulted, to go to, like the gray zone and system update and do dissidents. There's a whole bunch of these folks where you go and you listen, and everything makes sense, and it's moral and it's ethical, and they are practicing journalism, and of course they have a framework, but they are not as insulting to our intelligence as let's say, a CNN or a MSNBC. How do you feel about the mainstream media, from 20 years ago and now, and 30 years ago? I think it has gone worse, but what do you think? I'll start with Mohammed.
Oh, I guess, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You have lots of horrendous reporting in the New York Times. Sometimes you get good reporting. Sometimes you get, there's more good reporting than there was 30 years ago, for sure. But there's also less of an excuse for the horrendous reporting that still takes place. That's the frustrating part. It's that it seems that within the internal brain of the New York Times, in order for them to permit good reporting to take place, they have to allow propagandistic reporting to take place.
Interesting.
Which is deeply insulting, right? And I think that's the dilemma. Like yesterday, I think Washington Post had this brilliant article about the role that billionaires played in catalyzing this police crackdown in New York City. That's great reporting, great journalism, right? Yeah. But on the other hand, I'm sure Sarah Lee can trot out really nauseating stories in the Washington Post too. And so I feel that there's this contradiction in our institutions, and that to the extent that our institutions are playing the role that they are supposed to play, they are more willing to do that today than 30 years ago. But the price of that is that they still have to sort of pay a toll in a sense by putting out nonsense.
Yeah. Well, they have to please their readership, which is, half of it or more.
Well, I don't know if it's the readership or if
Not
it's
the
other
readership.
sorts of factors.
I mean, I would say there's two observations here. One is that the media is, in a way much better than it was in previous conflicts in Gaza, for example, or in Lebanon, for example. Although now it would be impossible not to be better, given the unprecedented horrors that are being inflicted on Palestine and Palestinians. I mean, it would really have to be the media covering its ears and closing its eyes not to report on what's happening. But as first of all, as Mohammad notes, it's been their efforts to so-called balance it. They've just run out and they can't do it anymore. Because if you might remember, in the beginning of this conflict in October, we were saturated with daily stories about the hostages and the hostage families and the victims, including a lot of the misinformation that was repeated dutifully by major news establishments, like beheaded babies, like mass rape of women. Of course, the controversial New York Times quote unquote investigation that has been fully discredited. They've run out of those. They literally just can't keep writing about those. They've practically interviewed every single hostage and victim they could. And it's just embarrassing now to try to keep coming up with that. But for the media that quote unquote was seen as going too far in the mainstream media, they have silenced them. So Mehdi Hassan was fired from MSNBC and his show was shut down. Ayman Mohyeddin, his show was moved to like some weird time on Saturday nights. And so we had, the three Muslim broadcasters on the most progressive station, MSNBC, and also including Ali Felshi, taken down a notch or completely fired. Because they got too close to the bone, too close to exposing the reality. This is not just a humanitarian crisis and a humanitarian tragedy of how people are suffering. This is what Israel is doing to them with American weapons. Now, of course, The Intercept, which probably in terms of print publication has been the most aggressive and critical of Israel, is losing its funders, and it may well go bankrupt. I think it's already lost a great deal of its funding. So there is a sense in which there is an inordinate amount of financial power among very well-resourced people who do support Israel and who will punish even major broadcasting networks if they go too far on Israel. And we're seeing that play out now, and we'll see it get much further, because now when the pro-Israel community recognizes that there is a groundswell of popular opinion shifting towards Palestine, when there is an increasingly independent and fragmented media that may have very tiny readership, but still is where people are going for information, including TikTok, for example. Therefore, they are now literally trying to crush the media and independent voices in the United States. They are trying to get TikTok banned, and I think they will probably succeed in doing that, primarily because of the critical commentary on Israel. They are trying to pass law that defines anti-Semitism and makes it something that can be punishable and prosecutable as hate speech, as criticism of Israel or describing Israel as a racist state. They are trying to strip NGOs that criticize Israel, including Dawn, from their 501c3 status. So they are basically now trying to undermine freedom and democracy in America, just as they do in Israel-Palestine, in order to silence us and to protect Israel. I think that's what the most shocking reveal is, the extent to which the pro-Israel community will go here in America to quash criticism of Israel. If they need to burn the Constitution and burn down the International Criminal Court and burn down the International Court of Justice and shut down American NGOs, they'll do it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is this, and I agree 100% with you, is that what they're doing, I believe, is self-destruction. They're destroying the system that has sustained them all this time, right? So, for example, okay, so you want to be a publication and you want to tell the truth, and you get yourself some 5 or 6 or 7 millionaires or billionaires, and that's the system where we have been surviving up to this point. Okay, so you kill the intercepts. How about if the intercept figures out a way, which is what the other, like, I don't know, system update, no, they get from thousands of donors, right? People, human beings, right? Who give them 5, 10, subscribe to Patreon, right? That's a system that you can try to undermine, but if you do that, you're going to mess the whole system down completely, right? Capitalism is not going to work. Democracy is not going to work. The real democracy, representative democracy is not going to work. And so how are you going to make your money? Where's your market? How are people going to make? So it feels like the capitalist, like the late stage capitalism that's eating itself is doing it. And we can see it happening in real time right now with all these folks destroying these institutions that are necessary, right, to maintain law and order, right, so that you can conduct your business. So if these guys want to make money, they're not going to be making money in a system that is completely totalitarian. They cannot. They won't. They won't be a middle class. They're killing the middle class, which has fueled them already, right? And they continue. And that's why I'm going to end with this, which is my most, I come from the world of artificial intelligence, right? I'm a technologist. I'm just like you guys. I'm weird in that sense. Like, what are you doing in this space, right? You came from a different world and you're here. And I believe in this thing called, or broadening the definition of AI. AI is a machine that was built by humans, right, that does things according to an algorithm. And at some point, when it gets to a certain level of whatever automation, you lose control of it. And I think we're seeing right now losing control of basic institutions, losing control of Congress, losing control of the presidency, losing control of the bureaucracy. All of these are artificial intelligences that have, because of the internal algorithm that is running them, are destroying themselves in a way. So for me, it has worked so far in terms of explaining why is this happening? Don't these people know that if you continue doing this, you're going to destroy the very thing, you're going to burn the very village you're trying to save, right? It feels to me. Anyway, do you have any parting thoughts, Mohammed and Sarah Lee?
I do think that we are in a very dangerous place. Things can either continue to evolve in a very positive direction, or we could have a severe authoritarian backlash along the lines that you suggest. And what makes me most pessimistic is the fact that we have one political party, the Republican Party, that is openly authoritarian. And so they cannot be relied on to resist governance of the plutocrats, right? They're totally in the pockets of plutocrats, and they're perfectly happy to destroy even the limited democracy that we have in the United States to defend the interests of the plutocrats. I understand the need to punish Democrats, particularly Biden, for his horrific policy. And I just understand even the fact that people will be too exhausted to support Biden in the fall. At the same time, we have to be ready that if and when there is a Trump 2 administration, it's going to be, the risk of authoritarian takeover is going to be extremely high. And that is, as you say, self-destructive. But states do this all the time. Nazi Germany destroyed Germany, right? Mm-hmm. Authoritarian regimes destroy their societies, and they think they're saving them. But that doesn't stop it from happening. And you're right. I think that the U.S. Constitution at this moment is kind of a destructive algorithm. It's created a sort of self-replicating loop of paralysis in the Congress, allowed representative institutions to be taken over by private interests. And we're on the precipice of a deep constitutional crisis. It's kind of strange that Israel is going to precipitate it, but there we are.
Yeah. Sarah Lee?
No, I mean, I think I already addressed the issue, so.
Okay. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you both of you so much. There's so much to do for all of us, right? We're all trying to move the ball forward. I am personally very optimistic. I think the if the youth was not doing what they were doing, I think I would be going out of my mind, to be honest with you. But I'm extremely heartened by what's happening. I think we don't know what's going to happen in the next few months, couple of years, right? I think some radical things will hopefully, I mean, for me right now, people say that this is the most consequential elections, and maybe there is delta between me and Mohammed on this. I think this is the least consequential election in our lifetime in the following for the following reason. I think the system is the system. Whoever the political class will tweak here and there, and there will be, I mean, they'll be doing whatever they do. Like, for example, Biden, spending billions of dollars on these two wars and saber rattling against China, right? Well, I mean, for me, that's very dangerous. And if he gets another term, that's extremely dangerous. Same thing with Trump. There's just another kind of danger. And so my focus really is on this movement from the bottom up across the board, students, media, all kinds of also cooperatives that are the labor movement. All of these are signs that that if there's hope, it's going to come from the bottom up and changing the system in a radical way. Thank you again, both of you. You guys are amazing. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your expertise in sharing this moment with me.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.